Ladies and gents, welcome in. Welcome back to part two. Without further ado, next up, our very own.
Thank you, Levi. So with deference to the rabbis present, in honor of my beloved father, Yaakov Dabur Moshe Chaim, as I always learn in his honor. Firstly, let me just start off by saying thank you for this opportunity. Really, anyone who knows me or sees me in shul knows that I love to learn constantly. But the challenge is it can be very selfish. You know, as much as it's for the right purpose and everything else, it can be very selfish. But when you have the opportunity to teach others, you know, it's a selfless endeavor. So thank you for that opportunity. Really, I truly appreciate it. And hopefully, God willing, I can enhance you just a little bit in some way, either about what I speak about or about learning in itself, and then it'll all be worthwhile. So, with that being said, I chose to discuss the holiday of Shavuot that just passed, as well as the period leading up to it, Sfirat Omer. This is one of the times in the last many years that has been the most interesting to me, probably because it was the one holiday that went largely unnoticed in my youth. Other than having a few days off at school, it was hardly recognized. And in later years, it has become a meaningful opportunity for self-reflection, learning, personal and spiritual growth. And especially with young children, the 10 Commandments, and more importantly, the ice cream, it really made it a memorable occasion. More importantly, as I learned more, Shavuot and the Sfira became more interesting and actually intriguing. Interesting, I guess, because one of the elements that always arouses my interest is when there's an interaction between the human and the divine. When we step beyond reason and what would otherwise be beyond our control and purview and move into the divine. This often involves the Jewish calendar, like Rosh Chodesh, for example. The first mitzvah to sanctify the month, we, through our senses, testimony and declaration, we control the calendar and the months, to a certain extent, the seasons and the holidays. So in that vein, Shavuot is very interesting, as it is a unique festival whose sanctity depends on us. Firstly, unlike Pesach and Sukkot, which have definite scripturally defined dates, in temple times, depending on the specific establishment of the month, Shavuot may fall on one of three possible days: the 5th, 6th, or 7th Sivan. Based on the testimony of the Jewish people, they would establish the holiday. As we all know, the holiday is established by our count: 7 complete weeks, 49 full days. Furthermore, unlike the other two regalim, Shavuot does not, through scriptural dictate, commemorate any event. It is established by the reaping of the grain in the fields and culminates with the preparation and offering of the sacrifices by the priests in the temple. Let's look at it in the Torah. So it says in Vayikra, I'll just read some of it in English. And you shall count for yourselves, and I emphasize yourselves, from the more of the rest day, from the day you bring the Omer as a wave offering, 7 weeks they shall be complete. And then it goes on and it talks about the offerings and etc. and bring it in the temple. And then in Devarim again it says, you shall count 7 weeks for yourself from the time and yourself, unlike yourselves, from the time the sickle is first put to the standing crop, you shall begin to count 7 weeks. And you shall perform the festival of weeks to the Lord your God, the donation you can afford to give according to how the Lord your God shall bless you. So what is striking about this is that there is no mention charge relating to the giving of the Torah. It is specifically relating to the reaping of the Omer and bringing it as an offering in the temple. In fact, there is no reference at this point to the holiday as Chag Matan Toratenu. We find Chag HaBikurim, we find Chag HaKetzir, we find even Atzeret. Furthermore, the giving of the Torah occurred on the 6th of Sivan, which wasn't always Shavuot by count in that period. A method I was taught with respect to the study of sacred texts. One should consider the text. It's hard to read both ways. One should consider the text, pretext, and context. Meaning, in addition to the text and what is being conveyed through the pshat, the simple literal meaning, one should consider what may be the real reason for what is being conveyed by the text and what was going on in that period surrounding the text, i.e. the landscape, as elements granting a more fulsome, holistic understanding of the text. I added a fourth facet to this method: subtext. Subtext is an underlying theme. So in this instance, text. The text tells us that on the day following the first day of Pesach, we bring the Omer as a wave offering in the temple, and upon counting 7 complete weeks, that is the 50th day, the people bring an offering of 2 showbreads, and the priest offers it along with other sacrifices in the temple. Context. The Jewish people had just been redeemed through signs, miracles, a strong hand and outstretched arm of God, and the Israelites are being shielded and sustained directly by God through the desolate and dangerous desert. They are about to become a nation and must commence this transition. The pretext. To teach the nascent nation to gain independence, as well as understand their evolving relationship with God, they are required to work the land with their hands, learning to sustain themselves from their own effort. Yet they need to understand that their sustenance is still at the mercy and by the benevolence of the Almighty. This is a framework for the Jewish people's relationship with God. Subtext. The Jewish people, while slaves in Egypt, were at such a low level of spiritual defilement, at the 49th level, according to the Zohar Chadash, that they needed the period of the desert to prepare, purify, and elevate themselves in order to be able to directly experience God at Sinai and receive the Torah. So according to the text, we understand that during that period, we understand what the people are to do and have gained an understanding as to why. However, with the destruction of the temple, this all changed. Since the offerings could no longer be brought, which was the central point of the holiday, is Shavuot and the Omer still to be practiced? If so, is it through biblical authority, or has it only the power of rabbinic authority? Upon looking at the sources and commentary from the post-temple era, there is much debate over its answer and the practices and laws surrounding Sfirat Omer and Shavuot. It is important to note that the best and most authentic learning comes from objectively considering all opposing views. The more divergent, the better the learning. We see among the Rishonim there is really an array of opinions. Here I have highlighted 2 of them. So first we'll look at the Rambam. So the Rambam says, is it
Page 6.
Page 6. Says, starts off by saying, it is a biblical positive command to count 7 full weeks from the day that the Omer is brought. And it goes on to say lower down on Masei Rokeach as a commentary on the Rambam. It says, even though, in the middle of the paragraph, even though our teacher, the Rambam, rules that even nowadays, post the destruction of the temple, the Omer is a biblical commandment, nevertheless, counting the weeks is not a complete commandment in and of itself. But we see from this that the Rambam holds that it's a biblical commandment. It still is today, despite the destruction of the temple. I've brought another source, the Midrash Lekach Tov, which is on page 5. Here. And it says, and you shall observe the Feast of Weeks for the Lord your God. That's from Parshat Re'eh. What does this come to teach? Since it is stated, and the Feast of Harvest, the first fruits of your work, which is from Parshat Emor, you might say that if there is no harvest, you do not celebrate a festival. Therefore, it says, and you shall observe the Feast of Weeks. For example, when Israel is in exile and they do not harvest the Omer, nevertheless, and you shall observe the Festival of Weeks. So here we see he holds, or implies rather, that whereas the count itself is only by rabbinic authority in these times, without the temple, nevertheless he holds by the text in Dvarim as scriptural support that Shavuot is biblical. So we generally see here that Shavuot the consensus is that Shavuot is biblical. Furthermore, there's a lot of debate and dispute over the count itself. Not only its authority, whether it's biblical or rabbinic, but whether there is only one count, being the count of days, counting of the Omer, or 2, being the counting of the weeks. 7 weeks to Shavuot. So is it 1 or is it 2? So first we'll look at a section in the Gemara, which
Page
is
5, 1.
which is from Talmud, page 5, Talmud Tractate Menachot, page 66a. So, and it says, the Gemara, okay, so it says, Gufa Amar Abaye, I have to, when it's the Talmud, I have to say it in Hebrew, I'm sorry, excuse me. Gufa Amar Abaye, mitzvah lemimne yomei, mitzvah lemimne shvuei. Rabban, so he says it's a mitzvah to count the days and it's a mitzvah to count the weeks, so indicating 2 mitzvot. Rabbanan devei Ravashi manu yomei v'manu shvuei. So in practice, the Academy of Ravashi said counted both the days and both the weeks. Amemar mane yomei v'lo mane shvuei. Amemar, he counted only the days and not the weeks. Amar, he said, Zecher lemikdashu, because it is it's in commemoration of the temple, and so since it's not biblical today, he only counts 1. And we look at the commentary. We continue on the commentary by the Nesiv, which is page 7, and it says, by repeating the word mitzvah, Abaye implies that the Omer count involves 2 distinct commandments of the Torah. One to count the days and another to count the weeks. This is the opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham, who implies that in the temple era, a separate blessing was made before each of the 2 counts. So Rambam holds it's 1 count, it's 1 bracha, 1 count in the 2 parts is part of 1, and Rabbeinu Yerucham is brought down in the Gemara, or brought down by Abaye, it's implied that it's 2. So it appears that Abaye in the Gemara conveys that there are 2 mitzvot, which was confirmed through practice. Looking at the Rambam, he holds, in fact, it's part of the same mitzvah. Now we'll look at another source, Chizkuni, on Vayikra, Parshat Emor. And he says, and this is in discussing the Yovel, the Jubilee year, and you shall count for yourself 7 Sabbaths of years. Since there is only 1 count here, namely by the court, there is no need to recite a blessing. However, regarding the Omer, where 2 counts are mentioned, 1 in Parshat Emor and 1 in Parshat Re'eh, 1 for the court and 1 for the community, it is necessary to recite a blessing. Now this highlights the matter well. Chizkuni uses 2 biblical sources, which we commence with, Parshat Emor and Re'eh, to identify the existence of 2 counts. 1 count, the Omer, the days, for the community, well, what he says community, but it's really the individuals of the community. And a 2nd count towards Shavuot, the counting of weeks, for the court. The Sanhedrin would count it on behalf of the people. In temple times, the court, the Sanhedrin, would officially count the weeks and thus establish Shavuot. They did this on other occasions as well, Rosh Chodesh, as well as the sabbatical Shemitah and Yovel Jubilee years. This act was so important that some authorities held that had they not successfully done so, the authority of the holiday or occasion would only benefit from rabbinic authority, with implications of leniency, only rather than biblical. It is widely held that as there is no longer a Sanhedrin, the count reverts back to the people. I think Rambam even says that as well. This is really a testament to the great power of the court and the people that they had in enacting the will of God. Let's take a step back and look at an overview of this whole matter as we see an evolution in the relationship between the Jewish people and God and the way in which it was expressed. Period 1, the period of redemption. The nation is in its gestational period, totally following and dependent on God for their survival. In this period, there was no Torah yet, no formal mitzvah to observe. They were protected by the clouds of glory, ananei kavod, and sustained by the manna. Period 2, the birth of a nation. With the giving of the Torah, along with instructions, mitzvot, on how to live and gain independence, still with God's presence in the Holy Temple, they receive the Torah and its commandments, outline how they are to live individually as a community, and when they are to commune with God. With the occupation of the land of Israel, they are to provide for their own sustenance physically, understanding that it is all by divine providence. They commune with God in the temple and through the various services and offerings. This is where the concept of partnership with God comes into existence. And they have the Sanhedrin and Kohanim empowered by God to act on their behalf. This is where the laws of the Omer and Shavuot are practiced in its full grandeur. Then we have the third period. I entitled this, The Nation Has Grown Up, moved out of their home, exile, and is to be responsible for themselves and this world, with God's presence concealed. I liken this to the passing of my father, when I realized that I had to truly be responsible for myself, lead my household, and take my own place in this world, without his direct guidance and input. Commencing with the destruction of the temple, the circumstances were so drastically changed that there was a new course to chart in how to survive, assure continuity, live Jewishly, and how to impact the world according to God's will, and all this without the direct and occasional commune with God. So now that there isn't a temple and the nation does not occupy the land, how are we to live, serve God, and fulfill his will? This is contemplated through study, debate, and opinions of the sages through the periods. Basically, scripture, practices, and laws are analyzed, reviewed, and debated in a sensitive manner consistent with traditions such that it reflects the needs and challenges of that period, consistent with the will of God, yet without compromising it. Let's look at that specifically. We no longer occupy the land. In fact, we were exiled and dispersed. The temple no longer stood, so they had no revealed communication with God, and the focal point of their service, practice, communion with God, and actual community was destroyed. How could it be reconfigured to accommodate this new unfortunate reality? Several things were done, and this is over the course. When it comes to the Jewish people, you have to look over a longer period, not just a very short period. So this was over the course of many years. The oral Torah was codified, so the laws, an essential, integral part of the Torah, would be maintained, upheld, and its continuity guaranteed. This was between 70 and 500 CE. The calendar was fixed. As there was no longer a Sanhedrin to proclaim the months, they fixed the calendar, and this was done in 358, 359 CE. A formalized prayer book was introduced, such that they were unified. There was a unified way to communion with God. Although prayers and service were established during the Second Temple period, the codification of a prayer book emerged around 850 CE. And there was a long period of review, discussion, and debate surrounding laws and practices surrounding the temple service and occupation of the land of Israel to understand how to apply it in this new era. This commenced with the destruction of the temple, and it continues to this day. This evolution is well highlighted in considering the laws and practices of Sfira to Omer and Shavuot, and more specifically the challenges and debate around it. Here's a case in point. The Machzor Vitry brings down, and this is from the 11th century France. He was a student of Rashi and basically documented his practice and his teaching. Rashi, and so he says, Rashi prayed the evening service during the day and didn't want to recite the blessing over the counting of the Omer with the others because he was afraid that he might be reciting a blessing in vain. So he counted with the others but did not recite a blessing. We were puzzled about what this count was for, and he said, lest I forget and lose out both ways. So let me just explain this. When Rashi would pray Marav and Shul after Plaga Mincha, which is around 1.25 hours before sunset, he would count the Omer with the congregation without reciting a blessing. After nightfall, he would count by himself at home with a blessing. If he forgot to count at night, he would nevertheless count the next day in the Marav service conducted while still day, together with the congregation without a blessing, but he was counting the next day already, and then again after nightfall in his home with a blessing. His position is difficult. If he already fulfilled his obligation to count when it was still day, how could he count a second time after nightfall with a blessing? And if he did not fulfill his obligation with the count in Shul, how did he save his count yet fulfill his obligation if he would have forgotten to count again that night? And I'll just show you from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch the laws that apply to that. Page 4?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first law says, on the second night of Pesach, we begin counting the Omer. You should stand during the counting. And here, importantly, it says, the mitzvah requires that the Omer be counted as soon as possible after nightfall, after 3 medium-sized stars begin to appear. That's much later, FYI, than when it says that he was counting it. The second law says, if you forgot to count during the night, you should count during the daytime, but without a bracha. That we know. On subsequent nights, you may count with a bracha. That we know. Then it adds, if you neglected to count an entire day, you should count on all subsequent nights without saying the bracha. Here he says the bracha had he forgot. If someone asks, and then the third law says, if someone asks you during twilight or later, which is the period we're talking about, what is tonight's count, you should tell him, yesterday was such and such. For if you would tell him today's count, you are not permitted to say the bracha when you count the Omer later that night, because you've actually said what the day. So the challenge here is that Rashi's actions appear to contradict each other. Either he counted with the congregation at the wrong time. If it was a valid count, he has thus forfeited his ability to do it again with a bracha. Conversely, if the count with the congregation was invalid due to the time, how could he rely on it if he missed during the following day on his own? So let me just add, you can see from the sources and commentaries of the time that this caused a serious commotion among his contemporaries and students. It's very interesting when you start reading around like that time area and people, that were around, you see a lot of the commentary that pop up, so it's a hot topic, Anyways, so now Rashi is no slouch. He was certainly one of the greatest authorities whose actions were closely observed and carried weight. In other words, we need to find the explanation to reconcile this. So Rav Soloveitchik, affectionately known as the Rav, presents an interesting and novel approach to rationalize this. He says, there are 2 kiyumim, 2 fulfillments, one for the individual, omer, and one for the community, weeks. One has stringencies and one has leniencies. One requires a bracha, one does not. Whether they are 2 distinct mitzvahs or 2 parts of one mitzvah, today they are 2 fulfillments incumbent on the individual and manifest in one mitzvah today. There is an act of counting for the community to fulfill what was the Torah obligation to establish Shavuot. This can be done during the Mariv service, even if before nightfall, from Plaga Mincha onwards. There is an ability to be more lenient in its fulfillment, as there is no requirement of complete weeks. The fulfillment of the mitzvah of counting on the individual based on Emor can only be done after nightfall, as the text commands complete weeks. This does require stringency, and as to the timing of its performance, and it requires a bracha. The Rav argues and holds that being part of the communal count for Shavuot, even at the broader time, saves the individual count if they forgot. He holds that even if that represents your only count for that day, you can continue the count the following day with a bracha in that case, as Rashi did. The moral here, the communal saves, supports, and strengthens the individual when they falter. Through this, he makes sense of Rashi's practice and reconciles the opposing views of Rambam and the other opinions. 1 bracha, 2 parts of a count, and it's all being upheld practice today. In effect, it does allow for leniency through this, but not on the basis that this practice is rabbinic, rather than biblical. As a side note, the Rav would paskin a lot, and you would never know what he personally held. It wasn't necessarily that he held what he paskin. He lived, and so it's very often that he doesn't actually comment on other people's opinions, just says what it is. Furthermore, on a more macro level, considering this in the text of being Jewish in post-temple times, it has a lot of meaning and offers much insight. It specifically speaks to the relationship of the individual versus community with respect to living and executing the will of God. The Jewish people, for which I will use the term Knesset Israel, and this is also a concept that the Rav brings down elsewhere, has assumed a much greater and powerful role now that we don't have the temple. It is the constant of our people and the baseline for us to commune with and fulfill God's will in this world. It is an entity unto its own. In this framework, the Torah and all its commentary is even more kiviyachol, if at all possible, necessary as the map and guide for this. It is the collectivity of all the Jewish people, past, present, and future, and it is immutable. It is not at the mercy of any one individual or group. It is Knesset Israel who received the Torah, past, present, and future generations were present. And it is Knesset Israel that was granted the land of Israel as an inheritance, not just Abraham, and not just the generation at that time, as we would have lost our claim. Apropos to what you were saying in Shul the other day, Rabbi. We are all partners in this socio-religious entity. We each contribute to its sustenance and strength, but it is not at the mercy of any one of us. It fulfills the will of God, and we fulfill the will of God by contributing our unique, distinct, God-given strengths and qualities to Knesset Israel, and thereby impact the world. The contribution of each of us is needed and precious, and moves the rotation of its axis ever so slightly. There are some extremely special individuals that have existed, our forefathers, foremothers, etc., and had a stronger impact on the whole, like an earthquake that shifts the earth's axes. The greatest impact will be with the coming of the Mashiach, who will align the Jewish people, Knesset Yisrael, and as such seismically shift the motion, velocity, and trajectory of the world in the knowledge of God and fulfillment of His will. So this also ties in well with the Kabbalistic approach to Sfirat HaOmer and Shavuot. We experience again anew the Sinaitic experience and the giving of the Torah each Shavuot, as Knesset Yisrael were part of it, and it's a continuum. Through the count, we prepare ourselves daily and in specific ways for that auspicious moment. In effect, we are fine-tuning, perfecting our individual, divinely attributed qualities to contribute to Knesset Israel in the service of God. It is clear and understandable that this focus is more important now than in previous periods. Given this, it is not surprising that with the destruction of the temple, the Jewish calendar was permanently set, and as such, Shavuot was fixed on the 6th of Sivan, being the day the Torah was given. Consequently, it is really only at that point could the holiday have been formally called Zman Matan Toratenu, as beforehand the date fluctuated. It ties in well with what's being presented here. What we see here in looking at the evolution of the relationship of the people with God through these periods, and most importantly the last and current period, we recognize how the focal point of the Jewish people moved from the temple, as it no longer exists, to the community, Torah, learning, and the perfection and preparation of the individual. And with that, the relationship between the people themselves to the community. A natural consequence of that is that the Torah itself, written, oral, and Kabbalah, esoteric, become also increasingly instrumental as the vehicle to fulfill and maintain that relationship with God. And so, with that, we see that the festival of Shavuot transformed from Chag HaBikurim to Zman Matan Toratenu. And the period of the Sphira, from the bringing of the Omer and grain sacrifice to the period in which to hone in on our individual attributes in preparation to receive the Torah anew. And this speaks to what is enlightening to me. The lesson here is that there is an interplay between the individual and the community in the service of God. We see in the context of time, that we have a different role to play within Knesset Israel and in partnership with God than in previous eras. While we as individuals ebb and flow in our expression and performance, the Jewish people as a whole remain constant, moving constantly on its path forward in the service and fulfillment of the service of God and fulfillment of His mission. Now that there is no temple, the onus is on us evermore to fulfill our individual roles, enhancing and strengthening the community. We need the community, Knesset Israel, as much as it needs us. We need to fuel it with our God-given distinctive character and abilities, which is purely divine, and it supports us and sustains us as we need through our life's paths. May we each individually fulfill our divine mission, and may Knesset Israel, the Jewish people as a whole, fulfill its collective mission, and thus fulfill God's will for us and the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very, very beautiful. Very
Maybe you should
beautiful.
still from my. Huh? Mikey?
Next up is someone very dear and special to all of us,
It's my table. I was back in there.
also known as the Kevin. Mikey Gottesman, please.
The act to follow Martin. When Levi suggested this Kinus, I volunteered, and later I asked Levi if he wants whimsy or scholarly. And being not much of a scholar, I chose whimsy. Right? So, here goes. Where there are Jews, there are organizations, and they have committees and meetings. Take, for example, the Holy Burial Society. They have meetings, believe it or not. What they discuss, I don't know, maybe Joni knows, but I have no idea. So it comes as no surprise that the months of the year also have meetings. And in their meetings, the months of the year brought up a sticking point for millennia. The burr is that, as Martin said, the Torah gives us indications on when the holidays should be. On this in this month, and this in this day, you bring a korban. On this and this month, and this day, you fast. So the whole of Jewish practice revolves against the beginning of the month. We got to get it right. If not, the whole service is off. So the complaint is, why during the holidays do we say Whole Hallel, and on the Rosh Chodesh we truncate it and shorten it and say only, as we call it, half Hallel. It doesn't seem fair. We should say Whole Hallel on the Rosh Chodesh also, especially considering the fanfare that went into declaring a new month in the times of the base of Mikdash. The months of the year, some were quiet, some were on the fence, but Tammuz, goaded by Maheshaphan, insists that the crowd, the other months, go along with the question and protest. Let's start with Kislev and Teves. the months that have Hanukkah in it. We said whole holiday for Hanukkah, and Tevis is a month that we say whole holiday, and it doesn't see fear. Next comes Adar, which, although we don't sell halal in it, we have Purim, and it's much anticipated. So much so that from time to time we have two of them. Next comes Nisan, and we know, of course, it has Pesach in it. And Iyar and Sivan are also special because the whole month of Iyar we say a special bracha for the Spheres of Homer, and conclude by Sivan, which has fewest. What comes next? Tammuz is one of the months that are very quiet, and so is Ov. But Elul sort of a beginning of the awakening of the Jewish soul, because the king is in the field, and it's a special month. Next comes Tishrei. We all know that Tishrei is very special. So Talmud goaded by Macheshvan, which has nothing in it at all, really wants an answer, and Macheshvan turns to Of, and she,
TC. Good. She.
okay. And he turns to Of, and he said to Of, how can you sustain it? How could you support it? We should say whole holiday on Rosh Chodesh. So Of says two words. He says, Loi Lona. It's not up to us. God ordained, and we have to follow. And this really got Cheshvan goat. He said, oh, you used to be the most anticipated month in the whole calendar. Tu B'Ov was the day where young ladies were going out in the field and dancing, and some lucky man was able to spoil the woman he wanted. And again, only a shidduch was made. So Of was really on the spot, and he had to give an answer why he doesn't want to participate in the process. And he said one word, oh Hafti, I love God. Because I love God, I'm able to accept what he ordained. So that was it. The conversation ended with that. what I want to say, and the rabbi taught us, in everything we should take away something. The takeaway from this, from my heart, is that God decrees, and we have to accept. It's hard, but I was once told that when a decree comes down, we have to be lucky enough to see the goodness of God in that decree. And I could say that I want you to take away tonight from what I'm saying is that the decree that God made over me, you all see the chesed, the goodness and kindness of God, that I'm standing here being able to not only speak the words how I'm doing. Not only could I speak the words, but I consider myself a better person because of the ongeluk. It's not a ongeluk. It's not something that diminishes me. It's something that improved me. So, thank you. Yes, therefore I could say, and honestly say, oh, Hafti, without reservation. Thank you very much.
Sivan might be very big inspiration. Well done.
Thank you.
There are still 2 more quick presenters after Ma'ariv. We'll take a Ma'ariv break and then we'll hear 2 more.